Good morning, everybody. My name is Benjamin Rodney. I'm president of ASHRAE New York and vice president of construction at Hines. And I want to welcome you to today's event, Habitat for Humanity Net Zero Green Affordable Homes. This is a Cross-Learning Alliance event, which is a collaboration between ASHRAE New York, Urban Green, and AIA New York to provide programming across our organizations. And we want to thank Urban Green for hosting us today. Habitat for Humanity holds a place near and dear to my heart and many of our fellow Cross-Learning Alliance members. We wanted to make sure that their message is heard amongst a broader audience. Founded in 1984 as an independent affiliate of Habitat for Humanity International, Habitat New York City and Westchester has served more than 2,100 families in the 5 boroughs through home construction and preservation, beginning with their very first build on the Lower East Side of Manhattan during the first ever Jimmy and Rosalind Carter work project. Since then, Habitat New York City and Westchester has brought together thousands of New Yorkers each year who become part of the solution to closing New York's racial home ownership gap. This includes not just single-family homes, but new multifamily developments, including the 56-unit Sydney House in the Bronx, the 15-unit Dean Street residences in Brooklyn, and numerous existing low-income co-ops and disaster recovery efforts, including post-Superstorm Sandy. Next slide. If you have any technical difficulties, please send us a note through the chat box, and our colleagues at Urban Green will do their best to support you. Throughout today's presentations, you can submit questions via the Q&A box, and we'll be monitoring the questions throughout the discussion, and we'll get through as many as possible after the presentation. This program does offer continuing education credits, so please email programs@urbangreencouncil.org if you need a certificate. That's programs@urbangreencouncil.org. And we're also recording the presentation, and we'll provide a link in the coming days. On this current slide, you can see the Urban Green values of excellence, inclusion, collaboration, and engagement, and invite you to be mindful of these during today's program. Next slide. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers today. Julia Deagle, the VP of Resource Development for Habitat New York City and Westchester. Juliana Bernal-Guinand, the Director of Real Estate Development for Habitat New York City and Westchester. Tristan Grant, the Director of Sustainability Services from Grant Associates. And Grayson Jordan, partner with Paul Castrucci Architects. So we'll hand it off to Julia Deagle to introduce Habitat for Humanity in New York City and Westchester. And just a reminder, we will be taking questions via the Q&A box. Julia?
Thank you so much, Ben. And we'd like to thank, on behalf of myself and my colleagues here at ASHRAE New York chapter, ASHRAE has been an incredible partner, giving very generously through their time, their expertise, and through their support as well. Also to AIA and the Urban Green Council for having us here today. Habitat New York City and Westchester, as Ben mentioned, is the hyperlocal affiliate to Habitat International. As a nonprofit affordable housing developer and housing justice organization, we service the 5 boroughs of New York City and Westchester County. Through our vision, we are building a more equitable New York by building more housing, preserving more housing, advocating for more affordable housing solutions, and by leveraging innovative and scalable housing solutions and models, such as community land trusts, which you'll hear more about later, limited equity cooperatives, and rental to homeownership conversions. Through impacting the affordable housing space, we are providing an infrastructure for equity building that can be passed down to future families and future generations as well. We develop both single family and multifamily housing. And through our preservation program, we provide a multi-pronged approach, which covers both technical assistance and capacity building, financial lending, and construction support services. We serve families who make between 50 to 90% of the area median income. Many of these communities were impacted disproportionately during COVID and have been facing unjust housing policies that have purposefully prevented and intentionally prevented communities of color from entering the homeownership market and from having access to fair, decent housing. More than 80% of the families we serve are single female heads of household, and more than 95% through our preservation program alone identify as BIPOC. We rely on public-private partnerships and generous philanthropy to keep our homes affordable for our families and communities, along with a competitive mortgage product through Sony May, which is a 2% fixed, 1% down. Funding through the city and state help to finance our construction projects, and we focus on private philanthropy ranging from corporate engagement on our build sites, foundation, grant making, individuals, ticket sales through special events, and also through our faith and community partnerships. Overall, we support our families in becoming successful homeowners through financial and homeownership training and as an ongoing resource after they move into their homes. I would like to hand it over now to my colleague, Juliana.
Thank you, Julia. Next slide, please. Previous slide, please. Two back. So our Habitat Net Zero project is, it was in response to a New York City Housing Authority request for proposal for a cluster of homes. This project consists of 13 scattered sites in Southeast Queens, in which we will develop 13 new construction homes and 3 gut rehabs for a total of 16 affordable home ownership opportunities for low to moderate income families. So why Habitat Net Zero? This is our third cluster of single family homes acquired by NYCHA. The first cluster consisted of 13 homes, all got rehabs. Our second cluster was a total of 23 homes, 20 of them got rehabs and 3 new construction. So for this cluster, when the New York City Housing Authority issued a request for proposal for this new cluster of homes, we really wanted to propose something different and innovative. So for this project, we decided to go all new construction. Sustainability was very important for us, and we wanted to push the envelope here. So we wanted to propose passive house construction. And since this would be all electric buildings, we would be coupling this with solar panels for the homes to be net zero capable. Many of the homes, as you can see in the top right corner, were in dire need for repair construction. So we decided to demolish all of these homes, do new construction, and this would aid in 2 things. One, we were able to increase not only the square footage and unit and bedroom count of the units, but also the unit count. There were 3 sites where we were able to accommodate 2 semi-attached single-family homes where there was previously 1. Also, by pursuing a new construction approach, we were able to replicate the layout of the homes depending on the lots that had similar dimensions as well as zoning. By replicating, we were able to save on soft costs. And building on the replicability, we also decided to make this homes modular construction. By pursuing modular, we would be able to better control the quality, especially since we're pursuing stringent passive housing sustainability guidelines. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, one of the main challenges we have been facing with this project is the lack of economies of scale. Although we are talking about 16 dwelling units, we're also talking about demolishing and abating 13 homes, excavating and building the foundations on 13 sites, and doing permitting for 13 separate sites. So the economies of scale here were basically non-existent. This also coupled with limited subsidy available for the new construction of homeownership units in New York City. As I mentioned before, the land was acquired from the New York City Housing Authority. We also received subsidy from the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development from their Open Door program, which is the only program that they currently have to subsidize the new construction of homeownership units. We also applied for RESO-A capital funding from local elected officials, and we received subsidy from the state, from the New York State Homes and Community Renewal Affordable Housing Corporation. We've also applied for funding from NYSERDA, some of the incentives for green building. That being said, being able to subsidize this project took a lot of time and effort, and this definitely extended the pre-development timeline. In addition, by pursuing modular manufacturing, this was another challenge we faced. First of all, because many modular manufacturers have their sample or template homes. So we were requesting custom homes that would be able to be built with the stringent New York City building code. Therefore, we did go through several modular manufacturers, and each of them has their own specifications and guidelines to which we had to accommodate. And all of this also resulted in significant value engineering, trying to make a way for our ambition and sustainability and passive house homes to be able to subsidize with the limited subsidy available, as well as cater to the population that we do, such as low and moderate income households. Now I'd like to pass it on to Grayson for him to talk more in detail about the design of the homes.
Great. Thank you, Juliana. Again, my name is Grayson Jordan. I'm a partner at Paul Castrucci Architects. We're the architect for the project, and just really pleased to collaborate with this team and Habitat for Humanity in creating these deeply energy efficient homes for affordable home ownership. I'm going to try not to repeat some of what Juliana said, but a little bit of a recap. So coming into this RFP, we were looking at 13 scattered site homes in Southeast Queens that originally called for renovation. As Juliana said, we identified that some significant advantages to going new construction, including the fact that many of the homes were significantly damaged. We saw value in increasing the dwelling units, increasing from 13 to 16, and also adding 12 more bedrooms. And also just thinking about a goal, whether renovation or new construction, is going to be deep energy efficiency that's sort of embedded in our firm's practice. And we do both. We're big proponents of retrofits, but especially for affordable housing, home ownership, that's going to be fully electrified. Top of mind is going to be really driving down energy costs and operation costs as much as possible. And that's just a little easier to get at in new construction. You have more control, more levers you can pull. So energy efficiency, healthy indoor air quality, and indoor comfort are all a little bit easier of a lift from a new construction perspective. If we go to the next slide, please. Another advantage of the new construction, besides optimizing or maximizing floor area, bedrooms, and unit count, is the ability to optimize the layout to different family configurations. We know that New York City families aren't one size fits all. It could be a single person, could be a couple, up to a multi-generational household. And by doing new construction, we're able to make a few small moves that allow us to sort of accommodate and that sort of adaptability and flexibility. So we go to the next slide, please. So here's a sample layout showing some of the small things that we're able to do to accommodate different types of families. First of all, these are not flood zones, so the homes are built quite close to the ground, very easy to adapt with a handicap ramp if needed. In fact, one of the homes will come on day one with a ramp, and that helps with mobility impaired and aging in place. Another important key point for aging in place is the idea of having a full bathroom on the ground floor and a flex room, which you can see in the front. Flex room for one family might be a dining room or living room. For another family, it might be a bedroom for an aging grandparent. Finally, with all affordable housing, always looking to maximize the resources we have, whether that be monetary or spatial. In this case, really taking they're not large homes. So taking the living rooms, putting them in the back, opening them up to rear patios and gardens, and extending that living space throughout much of the year, and just sort of maximizing everything that these sites have to offer. Next slide, please. So as Juliana said, once we're thinking that we're going to do new construction, We know we're not going to do 13 or 16 bespoke homes. It doesn't make sense from a soft cost perspective. Also, it doesn't make sense from a hard cost perspective. Just to really quickly recap, so that quickly got us into this idea of repeatability, scalability, and modular. So to recap some of the benefits of modular, you're going to increase quality control. Everything's done in the factory. We can go do a mock-up in the factory on the first critical detail, and then have that same detail repeated 16 times in factory settings. We're going to decrease construction time. There's some financial benefits to that as well. And there's also the opportunity to begin to establish concepts and prototypes that can be repeated. So to demonstrate ways that we can build to passive house standards, be net zero capable for affordable home ownership that can be repeated on different sites throughout urban, suburban scales. Next slide, please. Okay. I'm not going to delve too deeply into the details of modular, but I'll go over the high level points. As Juliana mentioned, each manufacturer has slightly different ways of putting their buildings together. So I would say if you're working in modular, it is important to team up with a good modular company from day one so that you're designing to their system. The other thing you need to know is how you're getting your mods from the factory to the site. You're going to want to map out that entire route because there's going to be pinch points, tunnels, bridges, overhangs that might have design implications. In this case, the mods are fairly simple. There'll be 2 mods per home, a first floor and a second floor. The mod comes nearly fully constructed. The entire interior is finished, all equipment, finishes, plumbing equipment is all installed in the factory. Windows and doors installed in the factory. Structure, sheathing, and air barrier all installed in the factory. It's delivered to the site. Dropped on a site-built shallow foundation that is really just a crawl space and a service space. One mod is craned onto that foundation. The second mod is craned on top. We'll heal the air barrier all around, install exterior insulation and finish, and do a few site elements such as solar panels, patios, and steps. Next slide, please. Okay, so knowing that we don't want to do 13 or 16 individual homes, it doesn't make sense. We want to achieve some scale. We also don't want to do one. We're working with 4 different zoning districts, all different size lots, different orientations. And if we chose to just do one mod, then we'd end up with the absolute smallest mod type repeated over the 16 homes, and we wouldn't begin to get all the benefits of sort of increasing the dwelling unit size. And so what we landed on, first we did, starting with the zoning study, we sort of figured out, what's the maximum floor area for each site, what's the maximum width, depth, height, and began to create these sort of Venn diagrams, and found that really there's 3 main types that would work here: an A, B, and a C type. That got split into 4 types: A, B1, B2, and C. And B2 is just 2 of B1s. And that's how we sort of achieve some economy of scale while also maximizing a number of units and floor area size. What you're seeing here is an early study where the idea is to create sort of simple, uniform first and second floors, and then to have adaptable attic and roof lines that sort of conform to site conditions. So we'd have an east-west mod type and a north-south mod type that would allow us to really maximize our solar area and would give each site a slightly different aesthetic look. That was unfortunately something that did have to be VE'd out for this project, but might be something that we would explore for another prototype of a similar project. Next slide, please. Okay, passive house approach. So pretty much from day one, we were working with passive house. It's something that we do in the firm for all of our projects. We are going to be using passive house not only as a benchmark, but as a design tool. So we're using the energy modeling tool fairly early on in the process, thinking about the different levers we can pull to get to our benchmark. I suspect a lot of folks are familiar with the standard, so I won't get too much into detail, But I would say it's a little different from many of our projects in that it's a wood stud project. So it's a wood stud mod. So we have wood 2x4s with mineral wool, bad insulation, and exterior continuous rigid insulation. We're seeing here an early drawing. The air barrier has actually been flipped to the outside. Triple pane windows, the usual systems you'll see in Passive House that Tristan will talk a bit more about, your ERVs, heat pumps, heat pump hot water heater, and then solar panels, which allow us to, using Passive House, drive down the energy load to as much as possible and then supplement with solar to get to net zero capability. Next slide, please. Here's an example of something we were able to modulate across these different sites, and that's solar orientation and massing. So we're using the same mod types, the A, Bs, and Cs, but we're changing the amount of glazing and the orientation of glazing between the sites. And that is just starting in schematic design, something that's really easy for us to sort of toggle the different things that we care about, those being, of course, views, light and air, but also thermal comfort, and thermal performance, and just sort of optimize that. And that's just one example of when you're integrating this sort of Passive House energy model into your design practice, that we're able to sort of find low-hanging fruit and really embed energy performance into the design so that we're not having to sort of over-insulate in one place because we haven't, put in the right window, for example. So we're really finding the right balance between economy, design, and energy performance. And then if we could just quickly, we'll run through the mod types. Next slide, and then I'll hand it over to Tristan in just a moment. So here's prototype A. I'll just quickly run through them. Prototype A is a 4-bedroom unit. There's 4 of these. Next slide, please. Prototype B, 3-bedroom unit. Next slide, please. Prototype B2 is 2 B types next to each other, so 2 3-bedroom units. And finally, last slide. And then prototype C, which is our smallest, is a 2-bedroom unit. And I don't know that I talked a lot about it, but just before I hand it off to Tristan, you'll notice that instead of the optimized roof that changes on each building, we ended up with this solar parapet with the solar array that matches that line that's installed on each of the homes, which takes the Passive House level design and brings it to net zero capability. So with that, thank you, and hand it over to Tristan.
Thanks, Grayson, and thanks everyone for joining us. I imagine most folks are relatively familiar with these programs, so I won't go into too much detail, but I do want to quickly introduce them for those who are not. Enterprise Green Communities is a credit-based certification program similar to LEED, specifically targeted for affordable housing. Energy Star is a performance-based certification program that has minimum mandatory energy elements of the design, and then you perform modeling and have to hit certain energy targets. The DOE Zero Energy Ready Home program is kind of the next step up from Energy Star, and it increases those performance targets as well as layers on some additional mandatory minimum requirements. And as co-requisites, the Zero Energy Ready Home program requires Energy Star and Indoor Air Plus. Indoor Air Plus is a healthy material and design-focused certification program that looks to optimize indoor air quality by controlling the chemical content of materials used throughout construction, as well as implementing best management practices for moisture management in and around the building to prevent any issues that may arise with mold and mildew. This project started, as folks mentioned earlier, with Passive House intent in mind, and ultimately backed away from pursuing certification due to the increased soft costs associated with Passive House certification, as well as the certification fees. But we still get much of the QA and the quality control throughout construction through these other programs, Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready Home and Indoor Air Plus, that do have mandatory inspections and things like that to ensure that the intent of that design is getting carried through construction. Next slide, please. So I do like to mention some of the challenges that arise from pursuing these programs. I think with starting at Passive House intent, there was not a huge issue meeting any of the performance requirements. I think the main thing that comes to mind was at locations where we were reusing the existing foundations, some of the water management elements that need to be incorporated in there were causing us to question and go back to Habitat whether or not these were worth it and whether they saw value in these elements, specifically around subslab drainage requirements, which there are some alternative compliance pathways through the programs, but you do still need to include these elements, mainly subslab drainage piping, the filter fabric and other elements around that drainage that either terminates outside the foundation or into a sump pit that can take that outside of the foundation. Ultimately, Habitat's feedback there was that based on their experience with other buildings throughout the city and throughout Queens, and although these are not in a floodplain, there can be issues with water management in and around foundations, and that this is really the time to include these elements in. It's much easier to do it when we're there doing the work the first time around than have to coordinate and work around residents' schedules and have to retrofit these buildings again with those solutions. So. Quickly touching on system performance, I think these, we didn't do anything incredibly out of the ordinary or, if you've done high performance or familiar with high performance electrified buildings, these are pretty standard systems and performance values. We did go with Zender ERVs, which are kind of top of the line for those components. We had ducted cold climate air source heat pumps with a COP of around 2 at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. The hybrid tank heat pump hot water heaters. And I would say what is maybe less conventional is the inclusion of on-site solar at all of these sites. So that's around 85 kilowatts DC throughout the whole cluster, mostly averaging around 85% system performance, and using microinverters rather than central inverters. So, avoiding any complications you can get with shading and site limitations, cutting down production more significantly. Because of the modular nature of this, the cluster and the project, the mandatory inspections are split between the factory and on-site. So much of the DOB requires on the New York State QA/QC compliance inspections that happen through a third-party agency. There's a separate HERS rater that's not through our organization that is contracted by the factory, who they use frequently and is more plugged into their schedule and processes and what they do. So much of our open wall insulation, air sealing inspections happen at the factory. That factory setting also makes it easier to track the use of materials and products required by the Indoor Air Plus program. So in some ways that has made accountability and tracking of that for that program easier. And then on site, we have the DOB required special inspections, the building systems by the architect and the engineer, as well as our final green building inspections, our final and probably a second rough stage after it gets delivered to the site. We do plan to have some preliminary blower door testing before the siding goes on and things are kind of brought to that full final condition. And this is, I know there's a lot going on here, but this is, what I personally have a lot of fun with, which is the numbers. And so we've broken this out by the building types, and we have the pre-PV HERS score. The HERS score is a performance-based, you can think mile per gallon for homes. The lower score, the better. 0 is a net zero energy home. Negative is you're actually producing more. Most of the zero energy ready home targets are in the low to mid 50s for these buildings. So these are all well exceeding the requirements of that program before we account for PV. After PV goes on, many of these buildings are hitting or exceeding net zero, and some aren't. That's largely due to the on-site solar resources, as well as the size of the roof and what we're able to fit on that building. The next column looks at the projected electric utility cost, so ranging from 1,500 to low 2,000s, a pretty good improvement from, I would say, standard apartment building stock that you can find in the city. But it gets really interesting when we look at the impact of the on-site solar, and we see the net utility cost ranging from zero, where in net electric utility cost ranging from zero up to about 1,000. So most of these buildings are going to have pretty marginal electric utility costs, which is fits right in with Habitat's priorities and goals. When we look at the last two columns, the savings to the 2018 IECC, which is the basis for the current New York City code, the savings are not as significant as I would have thought. And I think much of this is because the code referenced values for electric systems are actually pretty aggressive. And so we would see more significant energy and, I believe, cost savings if this was compared to a gas baseline. But the way that these reports are generated in the modeling software, it compares it like for like with the electric systems. But again, when we look at the impact of the on-site solar, which is not a required element of the code, we see the savings compared to that 2018 IECC jump considerably. And with that, I'll pass it back to Julia.
Thank you, Tristan. How to get involved. So there's a number of ways if you have an interest in working with us to learn more about Habitat, but also to be able to support what we do and to make what we do possible. So our first and upcoming event is our Women Build Luncheon. Women Build is one of our more signature annual programs and events that brings together women and men who believe in and support affordable housing, and also working to promote diversity both within real estate and housing and across. On June 8th, we are bringing back our luncheon to in person the first time after COVID. We'll be hosting an incredible group of panelists, including Sherry Wang from the Urban Investment Group at Goldman Sachs, Doreen Bartoldis, who is the president of National Association of Women in Construction, along with Ebony Young, who is the deputy borough president of Queens. So if you have any questions, reach out to me. There's a link here. Also reach out to me. I think I left my email in the chat. There's ways to partner to leverage or provide guidance, expertise, come out and build on our build sites. Support us through giving generously. So there's multiple ways to get involved, and we hope to hear from you so you can engage with us further. And now I will hand it back to Ben.
Thanks, Julian. And I can say from personal experience and with many of our partners and companies that get participating with Habitat in their build days, and we've also done engineering reviews, commissioning work, building surveys. It's such a rewarding experience and a great way to build camaraderie within your organizations and groups. So I would seriously consider it for those out there. So we're going to jump to some of your questions. I don't know if our panelists want to come on the video. So we have some from the audience, and then I have some that I wrote down. So why don't we start with the audience questions? So Barbara had a question. I think this might be for Grayson. So why did we switch the air barrier to the outside?
Yeah, that's just our detailing preference. So it's typically how we do it. I like the way that the air barrier aligns to the window and tapes to the window. And so that's how we do it on our normal buildings. And that's just how we did it here. The way we've detailed it too, for this particular building, there's a little bit more protection of the air barrier from the outside because it'll be covered by the exterior insulation.
Got it. And then these two questions might be for either, this could be Tristan Grayson or Juliana, but so the buildings are all electric. Are we doing any on-site power storage from the solar or no?
We are not. My understanding is that on-site storage is still really tricky to get through permitting and fire requirements. I don't know if Juliana or Grayson has anything to add to that.
Agreed, and costly at this point. So we would, if things change in the coming months, we're always looking to find new cool things, but as of now, it's not in the project.
Gotcha. And so here's a question on code determination. So were any code determinations required from the DOB related to compliance with the New York City Building Code?
No, it's as of right. The way modular is, DOB looks at modular different ways depending on the scale. For this scale, for 1 and 2 family homes, they consider it's actually like a product. So it's a product that's certified at the state level. So the modular manufacturer is responsible for getting it certified by the New York State, and then New York City DOB reviews it for the things like zoning and things like that that are site specific. For a larger modular company, then it's a little bit different, and it's a matter of certifying like inspectors, and it's actually a bit easier for larger sites. You're just certifying that the inspectors are going to take responsibility for it.
Yeah, I know on other projects I've had to work with the OTCR on sign-offs for modular or pre-built construction. So there's certainly things to consider. Let's see. So there's a question on the schedule. So are these projects in construction, and when will they be built?
Yes, so we closed on our financing earlier this year, and we have an 18-month construction schedule. So all the homes should be completed sometime in winter 2023.
Winter 2023 coming up.
Coming up soon.
Was there any consideration given for electric vehicle plug-in capability? For anybody?
No, actually, although to be honest, if we were starting today, there would be. It wasn't quite as much on our radar. We do have parking. It's not required here by zoning, but it wouldn't be a bad idea. Juliana, something for us to fundraise around.
Just reading through some of these questions. So do each, okay, so I think you did go over this side of Tristan or Grayson a bit, but do each of the 16 units have an 85 kW PV system, or is that combined for all units?
Yeah, that's combined across the whole building. So I think the average is closer to around 6 kilowatts. I think the larger end is maybe upwards of 10. And the duplex sites have a larger 10, 12K systems that are split between the 2 homes on site.
Great. Let's see. Oh, here's an interesting one for Julia or Juliana. Will the homeowners be given any education or owner's manual per se on this unique home type?
Yes. So as part of our first-time home buyer program, we do educate our prospective home buyers on how to maintain their home. So there will be an education component around the solar panels, ERVs, domestic hot water heater, and all of the components that are not typical in our previous builds, but there will be education on how to properly maintain them and use them as well.
In addition to that, resident owners manuals are a required component of the Enterprise Green Communities program. So we develop that includes system operation, everything like that. As Juliana mentioned, in addition to recommendations and outlining the low chemical intent of the program and recommendations for things like pest management and cleaning products.
Perfect. So here was a question. I think this is for maybe for Julia and Juliana. So David said, we recently went to a modular build in our habitat, maybe his local affiliate. Do you think it eliminates some of the volunteer experience, which is part of habitat, or how do volunteers get involved with these modular builds rather than more traditional single family builds?
Yeah, so in this case, we actually have 3 homes that are in circulation that are not being done through modular builds and are hosting volunteers currently. So where ASHRAE came out, that was one of the examples. In New York, they came out to one of the 3 single family homes where we primarily host our volunteers. So I don't think it really restricts or, limits our ability to offer volunteer opportunities. Volunteers are a really critical way, not only in providing mission moments, but also in keeping our costs low and under budget and being able to pass on those cost savings to the homeowner. So I think it still provides opportunities, just maybe in different ways.
Yeah. In addition, there's also a variety of levels you can ask the modules to come in. So you can leave some of the scope to be done on site by the volunteers in the modular homes. As Julia mentioned, for this project specifically, we did open up 3 gut rehab homes because that was another of our value engineering strategies. We were able to reduce in some of the demolition costs by pivoting towards gut rehab and opening those homes for volunteers. But although modular can make it a little bit difficult to incorporate volunteers on site, there is still scope to open up for volunteers.
Wonderful. So here's a question on cost, which we knew was coming. So was there any cost analysis done? And do we have an idea of premium or not and potential ROI for these particular builds? We often talk about economies of scale and multifamily housing as a way to make some of these upgrades to an all-electric seem more affordable. Do you feel like these cluster sites have a similar benefit as opposed to a single site, single family home? So just a little bit on cost analysis, ROI, economy of scale, and that could go to anybody.
Yes, so I'll just, unfortunately, most of this are single site, single family homes, and all of the sites are scattered. So in that aspect, it was difficult to get economies of scale. We did try to evaluate what is the value of having all of the systems and savings for the homeowner at the end. And that was helpful to advocate for such design and ambition, like such ambitious design. But at the same time, we were challenged by the fact that these were single site homes. Grayson, I don't know if you wanted to. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask Grayson if he had something to add.
Not a lot. I mean, so I think part of the question, what's the premium over a standard home? And that's kind of tough because there's a couple of layers to it. It's like, it's not just passive house, it's also modular. And so it's like, we're not really able to unravel what's leading to what the exact cost drivers are. I think you're right. There's not a lot of economies of scale here. But there are sort of, with modular in general, I think there's potentially moving forward some economies of scale as the market becomes more robust. Some of the what we've run into is just difficulties on site, general contractors not having a lot of experience with modular, and so as people get more experience with that, I think we'll see costs come down. And then on the manufacturing side, if the market builds up, you could see costs go down a little bit as well. And then for passive house, I think what's driving it is more policy. It's the code. It's local law, the local like electrification, local law 97, things like that are really incentivizing either by carrot or by stick folks to get more energy efficient and electrify. So I think that's driving it. And then also just good developers like Habitat making the right decisions.
And I think some of the design was necessitated by the RFP from the city, right? And you that's what you were striving towards to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the details. It wasn't passive house level, but it's EGC, Enterprise Green Community, would have been a baseline. And I think that's another thing to mention. Like NYCHA and HPD are also advocating and pushing the city forward energy efficiency wise. Like some of the most efficient buildings are coming out of those programs because it's required and it makes sense. So really great development and city side partners pushing that along.
Great. Are there? Okay, so here's one from P. Frederick. Are there any special hurdles for HUD FA eligibility, and do the modulars qualify for any of the HUD modular programs?
No, they do. They do not qualify for the HOT modular programs.
Easy enough. Here's one about the solar. Are you able to take advantage of any incentives for the solar installations?
Yeah, not all of them. Like we're not getting tax credits, right, Juliana? But
yeah, we can
Mm-hmm.
take advantage of the tax incentives because we are a nonprofit, and we already, when we work with the city, we already get a property tax exemption for the homeowners through Article 11. So the tax incentives are unfortunately something we can't use for solar. We do use New York Sun incentives. And I believe that's the extent of subsidy and maybe some NYSERDA financing, but that's about it.
The New York Sun is considerable though, right? It was a fair chunk of the cost.
Can you describe a bit about the timeline for the design and this process from start to finish in just broad steps?
Do you want to take it, Juliana, or I'll take it?
You can take it.
Okay. We've designed it a few times. The RFP was 2018. So it's been a long haul. Essentially what happened, I think Helena very briefly touched on it. We started off with a modular company. We got pretty far. We got into design development. And then at a point, I still don't know exactly what happened. They kind of backed out and we were to square one. And then had to sort of meet with a bunch of other modular companies until we found the right fit for performance and budget. So I would say, it was probably two, not completely different designs, but different systems, different ways of putting it together, the same basic envelope, which prolonged the process. So that's why I say, like, if I were doing modular again, which we are on other sites, it's very important to be comfortable with your modular partner and know that they're going to stand with you and get it to market. Because you don't, that we easily could have cut the design in half or more had we started with this modular company. I don't know if I answered the question fully. I answered the question I heard, but maybe not the whole question.
Yeah, I think it was more trying to figure out how long did it take you to design the whole project. Let's go to. There's a question: did the modular company have to get pre-approved by the DOB prior to being able to produce, or does that play more into the meeting inspection requirements throughout the process?
Yeah. So I'll elaborate on an earlier answer. So for this site, no, it's pre-approved by the state. So, and the state approved the whole design, and it's pretty rigorous. I would say it's more thorough than, and not to say anything wrong with the DOB inspections, but they're very thorough at the state level. Probably more detail oriented than DOB. For most modular in the city, you're right, you'll go through OITCR or OTCR, which is more about certifying the city, certifying the modular company, and also certifying the third-party inspector. Because what's happening is all that stuff that you're usually inspecting on site is being outsourced to the factory and to the third-party inspectors.
Let's see. To ensure the integrity of the thermal envelope, to minimize on-site incidents that could compromise energy conservation features, do you almost have to trend towards modular, or is it feasible to stick build these designs?
I'm just talking a lot, but yeah.
I think most of our high performance projects are site built. So I think it's totally doable.
Agreed. There's actually unique challenges to the modular that you wouldn't have in stick built at some of the foundation connection details that we had to sort of design around and making sure we're minimizing thermal bridging there.
Well, Tristan, maybe I'll throw it at you now. So maybe could you elaborate on maybe 2 or 3 of the biggest learning curves that other developers that are thinking about doing net zero homes might have to overcome?
I think it's tricky. I think getting some in-house understanding and capacity for understanding these programs is really important. Grayson is obviously a great architect and partner to work with because their firm really does work a lot with high performance building design. So the extent to which you can build in-house understanding and capacity in that sense is really important. I think there are certainly elements that are really good by going through these certification programs like the QA, QC, and inspection process that make sure you're getting the envelope integrity, duct tightness, insulation, quality that is included in the design and that actually is carried through. But they also add soft costs, modeling costs, things like that. So I don't think you need to do programs necessarily to have a high performance, well performing, energy efficient, healthy building. But there are benefits to actually going through those programs. And I think Grayson touched on this earlier, the early schematic stage, conceptual, site orientation, massing, things like that. That the extent to which you can explore those early on, it can have a really big impact on performance that gets more costly to do as you get later into design.
That's great. We've got a lot of questions. We still have some time left. So this is great. So Julia, this might be a good one for you. So with so much discrimination directed towards minorities in home ownership, how are you able to communicate that your program is striving to motivate and educate people to apply with low income and diverse backgrounds that may have been rejected many times from owning their own home? So more about Habitat's process and mission.
So we do go through a housing lottery for our developments, but we do focus a lot on strengthening and being very proactive and partnering with the communities we work with. And so we have a number of partnerships that we engage with locally on the ground, both community-based and with, on the political side as well. So we work really strong through our communication, through our messaging, and through trust building, and really working with the communities. We see it as a partnership, a true holistic partnership, working together towards that. I'm not sure, Julian, if you want to add anything on the lottery side, but.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. And also, it's important our partnership with the communities. So we typically build in communities that have been typically excluded from the market. Most of the neighborhoods we've worked in have been redlined in the past, which is that they would not lend to this any individual that would live in that neighborhood. So we do work very closely with the community board, with the elected officials to communicate these opportunities, educate the community, and make sure they know how to prepare for them to qualify for this whenever it comes through. And whenever the lottery opens, by following HPD's marketing guidelines.
Yeah, Julia, could you talk a little bit about the sweat equity process and how homeowners, when they apply, need to put in their sweat equity, and you work with them on low interest mortgages and things like that?
Yeah, so that's through our housing services department. So they really, hold the majority of the relationships and partnerships, working from, their entry into our program and their completion, moving into the home, and also providing resources beyond that. And so there are a number of requirements criteria that we require in terms of being able to enter and also complete our program. And so part of that is, attending and being an active participant in the educational training courses we provide, which cover homeownership and also financial literacy as well. And so, as I mentioned, we have a really competitive mortgage product through Sony May. It's a 2% fixed, 1% down that we're able to offer to our home buyers as well. And so, it's something that we work with really strongly in partnership with the homeowners and home buyers to make sure that they're successful. And as Juliana and Tristan mentioned, we don't just, hand the homes over. We do provide a pretty comprehensive training on what it means to maintain your home and to continue to be a successful homeowner far beyond, your completion in the program with us.
Great. And for anyone that's interested in learning more, I think Julia put her email in the chat. So you're welcome to reach out. They have a wonderful staff of folks to help you out with any questions and anything you might be interested in. I think we have time for a couple more. I think we have 4 minutes left. So there was a question about a little bit more on the financing and subsidy side. So I think, what subsidies were included beyond the $190,000 per home from Open Door? Were there any credits from Passive House Technologies and discounts? I think we touched on this a bit more. Was there anything specifically for designing towards Passive House and any subsidies that were received?
So we applied for NYSERDA funding as well. I believe $4,200 per unit. So a total of $67,200. In addition to Open Door, we also received financing from local elected officials. So from the Queensborough president, as well as Council Member Adams and former Council Member Miller. We did some fundraising for the solar panels, which also helped us fund that aspect of our project. And that was about it in terms of financing. And we also secured a construction loan through a private lender, which was in partnership with Local Initiative Support Corporation and Nonprofit Finance Fund.
And I believe we do plan to pursue the New York State Clean Heat Incentive, which is an incentive program for electrification of heating using efficient heat pumps, as well as electrification of domestic hot water. And I don't know if we have those incentives fully calculated at this time.
Great. And so there's, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Ben. I did want to mention something that we do talk a lot about Passive House, but I do want to note that during the value engineering process, we decided not to pursue Passive House certification. So although these homes are being designed using Passive House standards, the homes will not be certified because that was additional cost that we didn't think was necessary for this project per se. So I think it's important to touch base on just like the extra step needed and to reach Passive House. Sometimes it's an additional cost that affordable housing projects, or at least our project, was not able to finance. And that's something that we did work on and had to VE out while still having very good performing homes.
Yeah.
The Passive House program recently launched the prescriptive path, which takes out a lot of the upfront modeling costs. And we had discussed that, if that was available 3 years ago or 4 years ago, that probably would have been considered as another pathway to compliance with lower upfront costs.
And just one more additive on that is that approach where you use Passive House as a benchmark is something but don't certify. We do that not all the time, but it's fairly common. And I think it's a good approach. There's, doing 95% of Passive House or even 100% of Passive House, but not getting certified is a great building. But it's really important that you do the quality control steps. So we'll be blower door testing the buildings and checking all the insulation the same way that a Passive House would. We just won't be submitting those to FIAS for certification.
Understood. Well, this has been a wonderful event. I want to thank Julia, Grayson, Juliana, and Tristan